This is Haide Wall Giesbrecht of Encouragement Along the Journey. Welcome, everyone. My name is Haide Wall Giesbrecht, and I write Encouragement Along the Journey here on Substack. I live up in the Vancouver, Canada area. I am a counselor. I've been working as a therapist since 97 when I graduated. I love my work. I love people. I find that who I am as a therapist carries into all the different parts of my life because it's not just a job for me, it is actually just me being me. So I also have a partner. We've been together for what year are we in? We got together in 94. So whatever that makes it, 32 years. We have 4 young adult children who are all autistic and ADHD. And that's been a whole journey for us. So a lot of my writing is around stories that exist in my own life and how they interact with what I'm reading and thinking about and talking about. And I often describe my writing as an art exhibit of the thoughts in my brain. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation with Florence, and I'll maybe give a bit of context to the conversation once you've introduced yourself. So go for it,
Uh,
Florence.
Thank you, Heidi. I am Florence Acosta. I write Becoming You, and I am a former healthcare executive. I'm a registered nurse. I'm a certified registered nurse anesthetist, and I'm an aspiring coach. So that is a little bit about me. I had a stroke in 2023, and that has unfortunately caused some grieving for me because my identity, my career, and my title were taken away as a result.
Wow.
So, yes, thank you. A lot of grieving
Yeah.
in the last
Yeah.
3 years around my identity.
Yeah.
Yeah, and becoming you and writing on Substack have been very helpful because it's given me a new purpose,
Mm.
and a new identity. Becoming me is a safe space. It's somewhere where I promote inspirations every day, and I also promote the voice and how that comes out. And I want people to know that they're not alone, that their voice matters, they matter,
Mm.
and that they are enough just as they
Mm.
are.
Yeah. I love that. Well, and I always appreciate your questions that you pose and the reflections, and it definitely comes across that you're an encourager and you want to inspire people, which is really cool.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe I'll give a little context. So our the topic that we had kind of thought about discussing today was grief changes you. And I was trying to remember today as I was getting ready for my day. I was like, which live was it? And I think I figured it out. I was doing a live, I think with Sam and Chris, and we were talking about parenting. And I think I shared the story of how my dad, when he was battling cancer, uh, ended up apologizing to me for something that I had never verbalized to him had hurt me, but it had really hurt me, and just how significant that was. And in the context of that, I just kind of gave a quick little picture of when my dad was diagnosed with cancer and how he passed away. And Florence, you showed up in the chat and you were like,
Like,
"Oh my goodness, that is my story too." And the
mhm,
thing that was shocking was the timeline was almost identical, except for
mhm.
you, it was exactly 1 year before me. And so that started this conversation of, "Oh, we should do a live about this." So,
Yeah,
yeah, maybe why don't I mean, your dad passed away a year before my dad. Are you comfortable sharing the story? And then I'll tell about my dad. Yeah.
sure. And my dad was diagnosed with end stage kidney cancer
Mm,
in November of 96. And unfortunately, he was not a candidate for surgery because of the
mhm,
way the tumor had already spread to his lungs from his kidney.
Mhm.
So he's offered an investigational chemotherapy.
Yeah.
So he was also a nurse, and
Oh.
well, he said this was his last ditch effort because
Mhm.
what if that cured him of what
Mm.
he had?
Yeah.
So he said he had to try.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you being in the medical field as well and having gone through what you have been through, know that chemotherapy kills the good cells as well as the
Yeah.
bad cells. So I really do think that the chemotherapy took my dad quicker than he would have lasted. So
Okay.
that is how he passed away. So that
Yeah.
was November of October or no or November of '96, and he passed away April of '97. So it was rather quick, very
Yeah.
quick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that was I find on here on Substack, there's often this synchronicity where we hear someone else's story or we read someone else's story and it's like, "Oh my goodness, me too." Because when you posted that in the chat, my dad was diagnosed exactly a year after your dad. So he was
Mhm.
diagnosed in October of 97. Um, he had known something was up in like September, but the doctor said, "No, you've got this lovely road trip planned. Go on your trip and we'll deal with it when you come home." And he was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, which I'd never even heard of up until that point. And it was one of those situations where he did everything he could. He fought hard, but everything that when it was like, well, here's the range of outcomes, everything for him ended up on the lowest end of the range of outcomes. It just did not work well. And so he passed away in April of 98. So
Mhm.
exactly a year after your dad. And so yeah, the speed at which life happens in such a short period of time, it's a lot. And
So what?
I I had said to you in our chat ahead of time this week, those of you who follow me on Substack may have seen my post about last Sunday being my sister-in-law's birthday. And I've had a lot of loss in my life, so my I've written a few pieces about it as well. I It started when I was 7 and a friend passed away, and then my grandma when I was 12, and then my brother when I was 16, and then his wife 6.5 years later, and my dad 6.5 years after that. And so, when I thought about the question of, does grief change us? Grief absolutely has been something that I think has deeply impacted who I've become. And I'm curious whether you have found that as well, Florence, because I think you've also had a fair bit of loss, some of it through death, some of it, as you said, through circumstances that have taken things from you that really matter. I see. Thank you, Joe and Lynn, for your comments there as well.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Yeah. Unfortunately, unfortunately, grief has shaped me through death. The
Hmm.
death of my father, the death of my grandmothers, both maternal and paternal, and my grandfather. Mm. And most recently, through my stroke 3 years ago,
Hmm.
which took away the career I really shaped myself around, and the big title that I was able to achieve because of that career, and, that massive stroke I had, which I
Hmm.
did write about. I should be dead, because of it,
Hmm.
but I'm not. You go out to dinner one day or one evening with some friends and your spouses, and I had a stroke. And when I woke up, all of those things that I thought were so important and I really built myself around were gone.
Yeah.
So I had no choice but to grieve those things.
Yeah.
And I really grieved those things internally because I was not
Mhm.
ready to talk to anyone. It
Mm.
took 3 years for me to really say, I was ready. And, like I said, a lot of that was grieved internally.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
yeah, it still brings up a lot of angst and sadness,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's who I am, and, it's what has happened because I let it. I let that
Mm.
happen. But I needed it to happen that way, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and I think, it reminds me that when it comes to grief, there's no one way to walk the process of grief. And, when you said I didn't want to talk to anyone, and I think, and you're allowed to not want to talk to anyone. And sometimes I think we do want to talk and sometimes we don't. And maybe it's part of what makes it challenging for people to walk alongside others in the process of grief is I don't know what to do. And I know some of my most meaningful moments with friends were when they actually just acknowledge that. Like, I don't know what you need right now. This is what I can offer, or I don't know what you need, but I'm here. Just kind of that willingness to be where I was and to not rush me into where they thought I needed to be. And that's what I was thinking of as you were talking was like, yeah, you weren't ready to talk about it. It didn't mean you wouldn't ever be. You just needed some internal space to process before you could actually start talking
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it took me 3 years, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a long time.
Well, it's not just one grief. Like when you describe that, it's around work. It's about how you saw yourself. It's about what you were able to and not able to do. Like there were so many components to that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And, it really does shape who you are because
Yeah.
that landscape is so different, once the event happens.
Yeah.
Because, grief has no timeline, I learned. It just
No.
comes and goes as it wants. One
Yeah.
day you're happy, one day you're sad,
Yeah.
uh, one day you're angry, one day you're not,
Yeah.
it just comes and goes. And you have no choice but to take its hand or not. But it's easier if you just make friends with it and say
Yes.
and say, "Okay, just come and go as you please and do
Mhm.
what you need to do,
Yeah.
and it's okay." Yeah.
I think in my younger years, I would have described grief as something you move through. Like,
Mhm.
eventually you get to a point where you've moved through it, and the older I get and the more losses that I've experienced, the more I've discovered that grief is not something you move through, it's something that joins you. It joins you on your journey, so I like how you described that, like, just hold its hand and accept that it's there, and it doesn't mean it does change flavor. I find it isn't the same now as it was when I was right in the aftermath of it, but yeah, it's not something that you kinda get over or move through and then you go on with life. It's something that really becomes part of your world. And I think if someone had told me that early on, I would have seen that as a really horrible thing. Right? And
Yeah.
and I always say, like, if I had a choice, like, if I could go back and the question was, "Do you want your brother to die or not?" I would have said, "No, of course not." I would never choose it, and yet the things that I've learned and who I've become are actually things that I've been grateful for, and so I think for me, that's been one of the surprising things about grief, is that, yeah, it changes you, but it doesn't actually have to change you for the worse, and I wonder if part of that is just that acceptance, like taking its hand and acknowledging that it's there. Joe says grief sometimes can give good advice, I found. I'm curious, Joe, do you have an example of good advice that grief has given you? Because I love that comment. Feel free to type it in if it does. Yeah. I
I was gonna say, I think grief really showed me how strong I was. It's really
mm,
showed me how strong I was in those particular events.
yeah.
With the death, with the loss of my identity, it's
Mm,
really showed me how strong I can be in the end.
mm.
What does Joe say?
I appreciate what I didn't listen to from the past persons. Okay. Yeah. So
Mhm,
not taking some of those words and believing them about yourself is kind of what I
mhm,
hear in that.
yeah,
Yeah. 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 I found I remember, and I've told this story before, but I remember when my dad passed away, just feeling this heaviness. And it was spring. It was one of those years where spring came early here in the lower mainland. And so I very distinctly remember it was April, flowers were out, everything was blooming, things were green, the sun was shining. Like when you look at the world, it just looked perfect and it
mhm,
felt so horrible. And I remember driving across this bridge over the highway. And it was this moment where, like, as I came up over and I had this view of all the farmland around me, it was just beautiful and the sun was shining. And all I could think is, I feel like there's this heavy cloud above me that won't go away. And after my brother had died 6.5 years earlier, I was like, I never want to go through this again. Never, ever, ever. I cannot go through this again. And then when my dad passed away, just feeling so angry. Like, why do I have to go through this again? Why? Like I never got to know my grandparents because my grandfathers were both gone, one before I was born and one when I was very young. My grandmothers both passed away when I was very young, so I didn't get to know them. My brother passed away, then my dad passed away, and just the sense of why is it always me? Like I have friends who have four grandparents and great grandparents, and I don't have anybody. And I remember working through some of those thoughts, and I think what I took away from it in the end was no matter how horrible things get, I always get through somehow. And that's been one of those things that as more grief has come my way, that I remind myself of. Like right now, I may feel like I did that day on the bridge where it felt like this
mhm,
dark cloud was just looming above me, but it didn't stay that way. I did eventually get through that space. And so I think for me, grief has taught me that I can get through a lot of things that in the moment feel like I can't. And that's been really helpful to recognize. Yeah.
yeah. You know, I'm gonna backpedal a little bit
Yeah.
about
Yeah,
something
go
you
for it.
said, and it sparked something in my head because
Yay.
tomorrow's question of the day, I already thought of it and I have it
Okay.
formulated, and I'll share it with you and the audience. What is what is the soundtrack to your soul? And because I feel like I've had to persevere my whole life,
Mm.
which is kind of what you described. It's for me, I Will Survive by Gloria
Oh,
Gaynor.
love it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I really feel that I've had to persevere my whole life.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you said that, that
Yeah.
got my wheels turning.
It's awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So if you had to say, pick, and I know I'm putting you on the spot, pick
Yeah.
a song for the soundtrack of your soul, what would it be?
Oh gosh. So here's the funny thing. When you said that, the first thing that popped into my mind was my Spotify Unwrapped from last year, where
Mhm.
Spotify said, "You're a little hard to determine." Spotify thinks my age is about 99. And it told me how many genres I listen to. And so a question like that, I'm always like, oh, no, I don't know which one to pick. So yeah, I don't know. I would have to sit with that one, Florence. That one
Yeah,
would be
well,
tricky.
maybe you can pop in tomorrow and tell us.
I will do my best. Yeah, I will do my
Yeah,
best.
yeah.
Yeah. I it's yeah. Yeah, so perseverance has been what grief has really taught you. Yeah. I find and I like a while ago I did I had one of these weeks where I just had so many questions in my head, and I thought, "You know what? I'm just gonna sit down and write them all out." And so I sat down with my journal and I wrote out every single question that I could think of. And then I
Mhm,
was like, "What a weird list of questions." And I read them to some of my girlfriends, and they were like, "Heidi, you need to write about these." And I'm like, "Okay." But then I'm like,
mhm,
"I don't know, they feel so random." So I took them and I threw them into ChatGPT and I said, "These feel really random, are they?" And Chat came back and said, "No, actually, look, this is how you can group them." And I was like,
mhm,
so I ended up doing, I think it was like 5 posts on the questions that I have in my head. And one of the posts was there were a lot of questions around like grief and how I want to leave this world, what I want my kids to remember, like a lot of questions around that. And I find for me the many losses that I've experienced have really impacted me in terms of how I see the world. And I think like early on grief felt really scary. And, like, I remember after my brother, I don't ever wanna go through this again. I can't. I don't think I could survive another trauma like this. Like, I can't do this again. And then, when my sister-in-law passed away and then my dad passed away, it's like, okay, obviously I can do this again. I don't want to, but I can. And then I think at some point it became, well, you know what? Like, it's gonna happen. But how do I hold the reality of that without becoming hopeless? Because for me, that's like such a fine line because I could live the reality of that and become totally discouraged and hopeless. And I've always been someone who, like, no matter how dark it gets, I have to hold on to hope somehow. And
mhm.
so figuring out how do you live with that awareness of grief, but in such a way that you're still living life fully. And for me, that has become like the central question around grief is how do I live with the reality, but still live life fully? And I remember I said to my cousin, who's one of my closest friends, um, I said to her, "Yeah, I'm really being very intentional with a number of friendships, and just so you know, you are one of them." And I said, "And
Mhm.
this might sound really crazy, but the reason is because someday it is possible that my partner might pass away. And when that happens, I'm going to need people in my life. And if I don't build those relationships now, I can't necessarily trust that they're going to be there when I need them." And I'm like, "It sounds really like I'm doing this so I can benefit from it," but it wasn't. It was just, again, that intentionality of how do I build into the things that matter now, kind of with that longer term view in mind. So when I was thinking about the question of how has grief changed me, I feel like that has been one of the pieces, just having kind of a greater awareness of the reality that loss is part of life. It happens. Whether it's through death, whether it's through change. I remember my friend saying all change is change. Like it all feels hard in some ways. And even if it's good change, it can still feel hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
What what kinds of things have you discovered or learned about yourself?
Well, the perseverance part is a big thing.
Yeah.
I learned how to persevere. And when
Yeah.
you learn how to persevere, you find your strength.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, you have to reinvent yourself, right?
Mm. Hmm.
If you think about it. When I lost my identity
Yeah.
most recently, I've had to reinvent myself.
Yeah.
What is my purpose now?
Yeah.
That's what I had to figure out because I had to keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to keep going despite your loss. You
Yeah.
know, what is my purpose now? And
Yeah.
I feel like that's what I've had to ask myself with the grief, you know.
Mm.
Your question was different and my question was different.
Mm.
It centered with, well, what am I gonna do now? What's
Mm.
my purpose now?
Mhm.
Who am I going to be? And I
Yeah.
think that's part of how my Substack newsletter was born, the
Okay.
Becoming Me.
Yeah.
Yeah, is
Well, yeah. When
uh-huh.
I hear you talk about that, I think I think a lot of times it's very easy for us as humans to really identify with the things that define us. And when something happens to disrupt that, it really kind of makes us stop and go, well, wait a minute, like the question you asked of who am I now? What is my purpose now? And I think, in those moments that can feel really disorienting. And yet it's also this really wonderful invitation to say, okay, maybe you are more than the job that you have. Maybe you are more than the relationship that you have or the role that you embody. And I always kind of bring it back to the who am I at my core and how do I live that out everywhere, whether it's in my professional work, whether it's with my kids, whether it's with my friends, whether it's on a Substack live, like how do I how do I show up? And I find for me, I think that has actually been an invitation from grief because when something so significant gets taken away, it feels really, I mean, earth-shattering, earth-shaking. Uh, it
Mhm.
feels like it disrupts everything, and everything that felt stable is suddenly gone. And when that happens, you have to figure out, "Wait a minute, what what can I actually hang on to that feels stable?" And for me, that's been definitely been a turning inward and saying, "Okay, who am I at my core? And how do I show up that way, regardless of what's going on around me, regardless of what losses I'm walking through?" And so, yeah, I hear that in your story, Florence.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
you really kind of had to connect with who am I? And how do I live out that purpose now when the thing that I thought was me living out my purpose has suddenly been taken from me?
yeah.
That's huge.
It was, believe me, I lived it. I know it's
Yeah.
huge. And
Yeah.
I was gonna say, that going within, for me, the
Yeah.
going within, I thought this program years ago where they talked about the spiral, and she's actually on your Heather Platt, is her name,
Okay.
Plett, and
Okay.
she's a fellow Substacker, and
Okay.
she wrote this program where you do the spiral within to go in.
Mm.
Yeah,
Okay.
and then you follow that same spiral out, and
Mm.
that's how you figure out, like, you go within
Yeah.
and you figure out, well, what your issue is, and
Yeah.
ours was loss, and
Yeah.
then you follow that spiral out to the real world, and
Mm.
you use what you learned, per se,
Yeah.
or so to speak,
Yeah.
and you apply it to your outer
Mm.
world. And
Yeah.
it's really a lovely process to take.
Yeah. It sounds like it was part of part of the persevering and part of figuring out what does the new normal look like for me.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you found, I mean, loss, there are so many different types of losses. And I mean, we've talked about a couple. We've talked about
Mhm.
death. We've talked about loss of, life as we know it, a career, identity. I find too, like I find there are different experiences of loss through death. So, I think of my very first friend who passed away was someone who had a lot of illness. And so it was not unexpected. It was still hard. My grandma was very unexpected. She had a blood clot and died of a heart attack. Very unexpected. She was healthy. She was not all that old, and then, my brother was cancer, and it 2 years of fighting cancer, so kind of a long roller coaster of a ride that cancer can take you on. My sister-in-law was killed in a car accident, so again, very unexpected. My dad was cancer, but very brief, and, then there have been other losses as well where, like loss to suicide and to, yeah, just, unexpected accidents. And I find each type of grief brings different things. And, there have also been like the loss of a relationship or a change in a relationship or even like I have changed. And so that changes how I can relate to people. And even though I'm the one changing, there's still losses around that where
Mhm.
like sometimes it's been a loss of community. Uh, and so I wonder, as you think about the losses in your own life, do you see lots of different types of losses? And have those experiences been different for you?
I would say they've been different, and also experienced different kinds of losses of people, expected and
Mm,
unexpected. I would say that one of my earliest experiences, it was when is my best friend who passed away, from
mm,
high school, and I believe we were 23.
yeah.
I had just graduated from nursing school. She was getting a lung transplant, this was for cystic fibrosis, and we thought, "Oh, she's gonna beat it," and she died on the
Mm.
table. She died
Oh,
on the
wow.
operating room table, and it was very unexpected,
Yeah. How old was
unexpected.
she?
We were 23.
Wow. Yeah. That's that age where we often feel invincible, right? Like death is not even on our radar unless we've experienced it elsewhere already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I experienced it through work because as a nurse, you have patients who die on you.
Yeah.
And then, but to experience it firsthand, where it's someone so close and dear to
Yeah.
you, that's
Yeah.
different. That's a different kind of loss, you know? It's
Yeah.
not a professional loss, it's a
Yeah.
personal loss, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would say, the loss of my dad and the loss of my grandparents, because both my grandmothers died of cancer, and it was sad, but they were in the Philippines when they both passed away,
Okay.
and my parents both went and visited their grandmothers before they passed, but
Yeah.
it was expected, like my
Yes.
father's was expected, but
Yeah.
so brief. And I was gonna say more recently, for me, there was the loss uh, I don't wanna it was motherhood,
Mm.
parenthood, because, my son decided to move to a different state,
Mm.
1,231 miles away to be exact.
Oh.
So, motherhood as I knew it was no longer.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was a loss of my parenthood as I thought it was, you know,
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
had to mother from afar now, and I
Yeah.
had to learn that there are boundaries, and he was setting them.
Yeah. Well, and I think like the loss of dreams or the loss of what we hoped would be is really significant. Like when my partner and I got together, we always knew that we wanted to have kids eventually. We didn't want them right away, but down the road we'd want to have kids. And again, like when you're young, you don't anticipate that that's going to be a problem. Like, yes, I knew there was this possibility, but whatever, we'll deal with it when we get there. When we got there, we were dealing with infertility. And so when my dad passed away, my wish was that I could say to him, "Hey, you're going to be an OPA again." But we hadn't been able to get pregnant. And we were on our own journey of grief, trying to figure out, are we even going to be able to have kids? And we did eventually. We had 4 kids. But interestingly, recently, all of my kids are only one of the 4 is in a relationship, and the others don't really seem to have any interest in relationships, and all of them have kind of expressed that they're not really interested in having kids, and so, I look at my storage room full of little people, and Hot Wheels cars and Thomas the Train sets and all these like
Mm.
beautiful things that I've kept from their childhood. And I go, I may never have grandkids to share those with. And so I've recently kind of been processing some of that because I don't want to put my expectations on my kids. I don't decide whether they're having kids or not. That is their decision. And so trying to really like you described, holding grief's hand, I think my version of that has been, you know what? If I get to be a grandma, I will love that because I love kids and I love the idea of having, time to play with them and teaching them things and giving their parents a break. I love that, but that may not happen. And if it doesn't, my partner and I love spending time together. We love traveling together. We love just quiet moments spent doing things together. And so I look at my friends who do have grandkids and I see how involved their life gets with babysitting and, being there and suddenly stepping in to go pick up kids from school and all those things. And I think, well, if I don't have grandkids, yes, there are losses, but I'm also going to make sure that I am aware of the positives that come with it. And I think, you know, it is again to me one of the challenges of grief is something I can let myself only focus on the negative, or I can also allow myself to be open to the possibilities that come. And again, I wouldn't choose the loss, but if the loss is going to happen, what am I going to do with it?
Right.
And Joe asks an interesting question. What do you think about how internalizing grief can cause illness? That's a big question. I think it feels to me like as a society we are often not very good about honoring grief. We're really good at honoring it in the moment, but very quickly people just move on with life and forget about it. And I think, the flip side of that is sometimes we feel like we can't actually process the grief. We just have to shove it down. And I think, when we don't process things, they come out somehow. And so can they impact illness? I think absolutely. Yeah. You're a
Yeah.
nurse, Florence. I'm sure you've got some thoughts about this.
Yeah, I agree. I really do believe that the body keeps the score. And you talked about used a term earlier, shoving it down.
Mm,
And when you do shove it down and you don't process that grief, it does manifest in some different way. And for me, I have trigeminal neuropathy. So the
okay.
right side of my face is frozen. And
Mm,
I really do think that this frozen piece of me has to do with something I'm holding on to. I don't
mm,
know what it is yet,
okay.
or maybe I do know what it is,
Yeah.
but I don't know how to let it go.
Mm,
Yeah,
mhm,
yeah. So,
yeah,
Joe, that's how I believe that the body does really keep the score and it
yeah,
really manifests that grief comes out in some way
yeah,
with their body. Yeah.
yeah. I wonder what that has me wondering about is just how we process emotions. Like I find often people have certain emotions that feel maybe scary or threatening, and then we don't know what to do with them, and so we shove them down. Rather than, like I always say, emotions are just communicators. They're indicators
Mhm.
that something is going on. They're not bad, they're not good, they just are. And so if we can accept the emotion and be willing to be curious about what it's trying to tell us, then we can actually use them the way that they're intended. And I wonder if with like internalizing grief, if that is about these feel like emotions that I can't bring out. These feel like
Mhm.
negative emotions. Nobody wants to hear about all my stuff or whatever it might be. Just that sense of there are certain things that I can't say or can't bring out. And I mean, emotions are such a huge part of grief, right? Like I think about, anger, numbness, sadness, just, confusion, apathy. Like there are so many emotions of grief that sometimes can exist at the same time. One of my favorite memories after my dad passed away, which that's probably going to sound really weird, but we were all sitting. So my mom and dad had this big table in their kitchen, and you could easily fit 16 people around the table. So,
Mhm.
we'd often on a Sunday have a bunch of people over for lunch, and it was like the place where conversation happened and where relationship happened. My dad had passed away, and we were sitting with the minister who was going to be doing the funeral, and we were, planning out the service. And so my brother and sister-in-law, the not the brother that passed away, obviously my other brother, and my mom and my husband and I were all, sitting around the table, and Brad was asking us some questions about my dad. And, like at first, there's tears and sadness, and then one person starts sharing a story and someone else starts sharing a story. And next thing, we're all laughing. And I remember just this moment of, oh, yeah, like grief isn't just one thing. It can be these, you know, mixed emotions that often feel like, do they really go together? Like we're planning a funeral and we're laughing. And yet it felt so natural and so connecting. And I wonder if part of internalizing grief is about feeling like you have to screen the emotions rather than just letting the emotions be what they are. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think they can sit at the same table together, and, recently this happened, and I wrote about it. It was just a simple note.
Yeah.
My sister had a medical emergency.
Mm.
She is a speech language pathologist, and she goes from home to home. She does home visits, and she was feeling dizzy, and she felt like she was gonna pass out, and her patient called 911 for her, and, before she knew it, she's being carted away in the back of an ambulance, and the diagnosis was dehydration and stress, and what she learned was important because the people that are giving care,
Yeah.
guess what? They need care too.
Yeah.
And she
Yeah.
wasn't taking care of herself as she should have.
Mm. Yeah.
So, that's an instance where, she experienced some grief because there was some kind of loss that she felt
Hmm.
as a person, because she was not taking care of herself.
Right.
And as a result of that, she had to cancel my niece's high school graduation
Oh,
party.
no.
But my niece took it with grace, and she understood. She understood. And, my mom was celebrating what would have been her 54th wedding
Mm.
anniversary. So there was some grief there and
Yeah.
some sadness there,
Yeah.
but, that was a celebration that would have occurred. And
Yeah.
my son at the same time was celebrating we were celebrating his 22nd birthday a little early. So that all sat at the same
Wow.
table this
Yes.
one evening that we were doing all this,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So it can sit at the same table.
Yeah.
And it did that one
Yeah.
evening. Yeah,
Well, and it's
recently.
interesting. Yeah, and it's interesting because as you say that, I think, yeah, life goes on even when grief
Mhm.
happens. And I wonder if sometimes we think that it has to be either or, like we either have to sit with the emotions or life has to go on. And really what you're describing is both. Like
Yeah.
life goes on and grief is there too. And so finding a way to really honor both. Like, yeah, life
Mhm.
goes on and grief is present. I find one of the things that there's a lot of things that I wish I could do more of, and I know I don't always do this perfectly, but with some of the key people in my life when there has been a significant loss. In recent years, something I've started doing is putting that loss in my calendar. And so I think of, a dear friend who lost a partner. And in my calendar, I have their anniversary and I have his date of death. And every year as that comes up, I just send a text like, hey, thinking of you today. I know that this is, such and such a day. I wish I had had the wherewithal to start doing that earlier because I know that there are friends where there have been losses where if I knew when they were, I would want to acknowledge it. But I again find like just that's part of my way of acknowledging that life goes on and grief is present. And yeah, it's definitely I find grief is an interesting journey, and I know there were a number of comments earlier on. I've been reading them as they go, and I just thank you all for sharing some of your experiences. It definitely I mean, grief, it seems to be a language that many of us share, and I think, it's so important not to internalize it, but to talk about it and to just normalize talking about it. And I appreciate, there's so many writers on Substack that are writing about their experiences with grief. And I think there's something about feeling like I'm not alone in this that is really, really powerful. And so, yeah, to everyone who's listening, wherever you find yourself today on this journey of grief, like knowing that you're not alone, other people can relate. Maybe sometimes, like Florence and I, you might find this eerie commonality where it's like, oh my goodness, you're telling my story. I mean, the only thing that could have made it more intense is if it was the same year. Like, it's really quite something. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Any thoughts that that you feel like we haven't addressed yet or that you want to kind of focus on as we're kind of winding it down, Florence?
Yeah, I wanna talk about acceptance because you talked
Yeah.
about that earlier, and
Yeah.
there's this fabulous act I subscribe to him, and I don't know if you subscribe to him, but, Chris B. Wright,
Yes, I do.
yeah, and he he posts a lot about his son,
Yeah.
Ray Ray, who a disorder, and he's nonverbal, and he's Chris B. has talked about how he's had to accept recently how his son he's never gonna have these moments that
Mhm.
he thought he would have with
Mhm.
his son. So, that's why it's important not to push those feelings down when you
Yeah.
have them. Have them.
Yeah.
Don't push them down. And that's what he does when he writes his poetry,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
he expresses himself so beautifully.
Yeah. Have you found writing to be part of the healing process for you as well, Florence?
For sure,
Yeah.
for sure. I don't know. Well, I do know. I do know that Substack has allowed me
Mm.
to voice myself and share those inner parts of me that I
Yeah.
would not have shared before. Yeah,
Yeah.
and write about because I feel like in some ways it's like pre-journaling.
Totally.
Not that it costs anything to journal, but, I should say pre-therapy.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I know I journaled a lot, during some of the times of deep loss in my life, and I I don't know whether I still have the journals tucked away in a box in the garage somewhere or if I ended up, like, getting rid of them. I feel like I might still have them. I really hope that someday I find them because I think it would be really interesting to go back and read. I definitely during the seasons of uncertainty and change, writing in my journal was a lifeline for me. Absolutely. And always encourage, I know not everyone finds writing helpful, but I always encourage people to try, like try writing because you may find that it's actually really helpful. Yeah, if someday I find my journals, y'all might just find them published here on Substack. You never know, but
You
yeah.
know, Heidi, I was gonna
Mm.
say you'll find them at the right time.
Yeah. Yeah.
You'll
Yeah.
find them when you're supposed to.
Yeah. And if I don't, the memories may come back when they need to. Yeah. I think for me, I think I'm just gonna quickly tell the story of this week because this
Oh,
week
yeah,
has
please.
been, yeah, I know it's been such a fascinating week. So I've been doing the artist's way and trying to do my morning pages, every, anytime pages, Chantel and I have started calling them.
Mhm,
And some weeks I do better than others. And so Sunday I sat down and I pulled out my journal and I was going to do morning pages in the morning, which was a big
mhm.
accomplishment. And I pulled up my phone to see what the date was, and it was June 28th. And I was like, it's my sister-in-law's birthday, and she's the one who was killed in a car accident. And so I was like, "Oh, I remember I have a picture from my brother and sister-in-law's engagement." So I went looking for it and I posted it and I did just a little tribute to her. And a friend of mine, John Longhurst, he's a journalist with CBC here in Canada and with the Winnipeg Free Press, messaged me and said, "Hey, did you know that I knew your sister-in-law?" And I said,
Mhm.
"No." And so he tells me how he knew her, and he says, "Did you know that her name is on a monument in Ottawa?"
Mm.
And I said, "What?" And so
Mhm.
he shares the link with me. So I go to look at the link, and the link says that there was this monument put up to aid workers who were killed while serving, doing relief work. And she was in Bolivia doing some relief work during a time when there was flooding, and she was killed in a car accident because of the flooding. And so her name was on this monument. And I was like, what? So this all happened Sunday. So Monday, what do you do with that? You post on Substack, right? So I
Mhm.
posted on Substack and I'm like, this is the most amazing thing that happened. And I share about it. And one of my readers says, no way. I am going to that monument. Can I go there and
Ah,
say a prayer for her? Like, what's her name? And I'm like, oh my goodness. So I message her and I'm like, this is her name. And I'm like, why are you going there? Like, do you
mhm.
live there? Are you going on holidays? Like, what is going on? And she says, this is 5 minutes from my house. And this just feels like a moment that's really special. And I was like, yeah, I feel that too. Like, oh my goodness. So she is the next time she is in that area, she's going to take a picture for me and send it to me because Ottawa for me is the other side of the country. And I do
Yeah.
now want to go there. But my whole family, we had no idea. So I got to share this with my family to say, hey guys, here's what I discovered this week. And it's been this really special moment of connection for my whole family. And so that felt like such an appropriate week as we're heading towards this chat with you and me. And I was like, wow, again, just such an fun experience of seeing not just the sadness and the heaviness of grief, but some of these little moments of joy that can come even in the midst of heaviness.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So here's another synchronicity between you and me. Is
Okay.
June 28th is my parents' wedding anniversary,
Oh,
and
wow.
it coincides with your
Birthday.
sister-in-law's birthday, yeah. And that
Goodness.
was a day, that
All
we
of this happened. Yeah.
yeah, that was the day all of that happened, and that was also the day that we celebrated my son's 22nd birthday.
Wow.
Um, and it so happened to be my mom's 54th wedding anniversary would have been
Goodness.
my mom's 54th wedding anniversary,
Yeah.
and it was also the day after my my niece's, what would have been my niece's
Grad.
graduation party. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Hey, like these. Yeah. And I find in the midst of grief, there are often these little moments of sometimes they're joy, sometimes they're peace, sometimes they're calmness. but just these little, I don't, maybe oasis moments is a good way to describe it. But
I was gonna say my coach, she calls them glimmers of hope.
that's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what I would call our little glimmers of hope. They're little
Yeah.
sparkles.
Yeah.
We're gonna sprinkle that everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what would you want to leave people with? Either maybe a question to think about or maybe a word of encouragement as they're kind of processing whatever grief looks like in their life. What wisdom do you want to leave them with, Florence?
I just want to encourage them to take grief's hand and
Mm.
say, "It's gonna be okay," and that, something unfortunately that you have to go through, but you have to go and experience the grief
Yeah.
and just let it flow through you, and you'll be stronger because of it. You really will.
Mm. Yeah.
How about you, Heidi?
Ha- I think maybe just an encouragement that grief happens, like loss happens. And in order to live life fully, we have to open up ourselves to the possibility of loss. And in the moment, it often feels like we can't get through it and we're not going to be able to keep going. But I've gone through it enough times now that I actually really believe that we do get through it. It feels like we're not gonna get through it, but we do. And so I think if somebody is in the midst of grief, know that sometimes you may not have a lot of hope, but you might be able to hold on to someone else's hope. And I think that's what I would wanna leave people with is just the hope that grief is a reality and it changes you, but that doesn't have to feel hopeless. There can
Mhm.
actually be a lot of hope in that.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Florence, for being willing to do this. I know we had to set it up quite a ways in advance, but
Yeah.
yay. And it's been really lovely just chatting with you. And
Yes, it has been very lovely chatting with you as well. And
yeah,
I just really enjoyed how our conversation flowed.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Thank you. Yeah, and thank you to everyone who joined and the comments in the chat have been wonderful to follow and just really appreciate all of you being here and I guess to those who will be listening to the replay, feel free to message either of us or comment on, once we post this, feel free to add your comments there. And just yeah, thank you everyone for taking a bit of your time today to be here with us. So,
Yeah, yeah, I wanna say thank you too, especially to our I know you live in Canada, but our
yeah.
American friends who are celebrating 4th of July today, who have and often have joined us, thank you. And thank you
Yes.
to everyone actually who's been here.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, have a wonderful weekend, everyone. And yes, to our American friends, happy 4th of July. We Canadians love you.
Thank you, you Canadians.
Awesome. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone.
Yeah,
Bye.
have a wonderful weekend. Goodbye.